And I'm going to introduce starting from Justin, and then I'm going to have you as a last person. So this is Justin, and I'll have you introduce yourself, Justin.
Sure, yeah, thank you. So I'm Justin Whiting. Just starting my dissertation, working on my dissertation proposal right now. I've had a lot of some great experiences here at IU around online learning, blended learning, all of the things with Dr. Bonk. And then also more recently, during the past year or 2 years, I was one of the graduate students that got to help be involved in creating a makerspace in our School of Education. So that was just a really great way to tie into, again, a lot of the ideas that we've been discussing and researching, just, informal learning areas in general. So that's been a really, really great opportunity, and exciting to see all that. So yeah, it's exciting to see and be a part of this. So.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Justin. You have a lot of experiences with many different conferences. So yeah.
Yeah, it's both good and bad. But yeah, I've been able to go to quite a few conferences, and it's been fun. So. Great. I've been to AERA twice. I went to Vancouver in whatever it was, 2011, 2012, and then Philadelphia as well. So yeah, I've been to AERA a couple times and then a few other conferences. So
yeah, that's great. Okay. Verily, do you want to introduce yourself? Thank you for joining us.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was just trying different lighting because my room is kind of weird. So I'm a fifth year student and candidate, so I'll be defending October. So my research interests are around design, electronic textiles, and my dissertation is specifically focused on design problem framing in the makerspace. So it's a bit related to Justin's work.
Great.
Originally from Singapore.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yes. Nadia, thank you for joining us. Yeah, if we can have, you introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name's Nadia Sever. I'm a fourth year doctoral student. And I've had the opportunity to attend a couple of AERAs, but I've been submitting to AERA since my master's program. And my interests are primarily in international and comparative education with a ICT focus for capacity building and development.
Great. Can you explain a little bit about ICT? Because we have this group, we are all CNI, and some of us are IT, but no. Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of take educational technology a step back because a lot of some of the technology intervention work that I do consulting for talks about using hand-cranked radios to intercept lesson content. And so there will be a classroom of students huddled around one radio. In 2013 and 2014, I had the opportunity to go to Cuba, and there were students huddled around a single computer where there was an intranet. And that's kind of a unique concept because at the beginning of the year, every school gets stacks of CDs. And that is the education material that the Minister of Education approves. And so there was no internet. Like what we consider the internet is their version of the internet, but it's closed system for the entire country. And so there's a slight differentiation between, I guess, what we would consider technology and what's kind of considered ICT 4D. And that's not a common term that really is used within instructional technology. So I kind of veer away from that term a little bit, but that's generally the term that's used out in the alternate academic field. It's called ICT 4D.
Okay. Wow. Fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to move my camera to just kind of show everybody in the room. So... Yes. Okay. So let's see. Okay. So Dr. Curtis Bonk is at Indiana University, and he's one of those most well-traveled, well-presented. He goes to anywhere from like Dubai to Singapore and Korea in one day. I mean, one week, not one day. He's a robot. So yeah. So I'm without further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Wong to introduce himself. Who's going to do a better job than I'm trying to do, right? Yeah, Kurt.
Okay, well, thank you, Mimi, for inviting me in here today. It's great to join everyone in Houston. I've been there several times. There's a possibility I may be back in the fall for a MOOCs conference, but we'll talk more about that later on. So we'll see. We should do some warm-up questions, Mimi. Let's just do some quick. I'll do 15 minutes of presenting, then you guys will do Q&A. Then Naja will present for 5, then Verily for 5, Justin for 5, then we'll have some more Q&A. So we're going to go a little back and forth. But before we start, could I get the audience to yell out when our AERA proposals due? What day?
July 22nd.
Okay. Number 2, what city is it in?
San Antonio.
Okay. Number 3, it gets a little harder. What date is AERA this coming year? When does it start? What day? It's a Thursday. What day does it end?
Monday.
Monday, you're right, May 1st. Now, I'm holding up my computer with one of my books, The World is Open. Who gets the answer to this next question correct first, Mimi, and who raises their hand first gets a copy. Where is AERA in 2018?
Oh, I don't even know that.
Nobody knows. Okay.
How about Portland? Is it in Portland?
Is it in Portland? I haven't checked.
No. 2018 or 2019. Whoever comes up with the first answer to either of those questions, I will give a book to. Who's got it?
Ashley said New York.
New York is it. 2019. Not Ashley. Who's got 2019? I'll give a second book to.
Okay, Chuin raised his hand.
Toronto is correct.
Canada.
Yes, he's right. Okay, you'll have to give me their addresses and I will send them each one. All right.
Oh, wow, okay.
Dr. Buck, can I interject really quick about those dates?
Yes.
So one thing I discovered about AERA specifically, the start dates are not firm start dates. So prior to those dates, they have a lot of graduate student workshops. And they're not free, but there's some great opportunities to network and do a lot of professional development. So if you have the finances or you can request some funding from your department, I would highly encourage you guys to check those out. Aside from just learning some valuable tools like writing a dissertation or how to do some presentation, there were amazing opportunities to make some new friends.
That's a great, yes. Good advice, yes. We really need to take advantage of this being in San Antonio. I think this is the first time in at least 10 years that AERA has come back to Texas, right? Yeah. I don't remember the last time it was in Texas.
Maybe Dallas a long time ago, but
maybe, yeah.
Maybe if that. Well, I don't think it's been to Houston in my memory. It might be one of the first times actually.
Yeah, but San Antonio, it's much closer from here to San Antonio than Dallas. So, yeah. Okay.
Okay. So you all have gotten one of these. My team, I don't know if they've seen these or not. This is a timeline of AERA, right? I think Dr. Lee gave you all a copy, right?
Yes.
So this is important kind of background information. I'll give you some more background information. You also maybe got the article by my friend from graduate school, Cecil Smith, on strategies for writing successful AERA proposals. I think by the end of this session, in an hour or so, you will be able to write a similar, you will have enough ideas to at least blog post on this. Naja's put up a blog post. She'll explain this later, summarizing. Dr. Lee will post these handouts to Blackboard of our tips and comments and so forth. Now, final question before I start. What do you think I'm holding up in my left hand and my right hand? Okay, and you're right. In my right hand are successful proposals. In my left hand are rejected proposals. Okay, I've spent the morning looking at some of these. And why are some of these articles, and notice the pile's a little thicker. I'll make this look thicker anyhow. The success is a little thicker than the rejection, but I have both. In the comments, I was just reading through before I start here, some of the reasons why I had rejections, and these are often with graduate students of mine. They're not necessarily single authored, so they're reasons sometimes out of my control. But too narrow of a topic, too broad of a topic. Sometimes just needs proofing and editing more. Sometimes there's a lack of coherence from the beginning to the ending. You don't end with a reflection back on how you started. That's a big one, actually. Not enough data is a huge one. Often people will submit AERA proposals without enough data in them and hope and pray that it will get accepted. And often people, when you have 2 or 3 reviewers, they'll find the holes, they'll find the limitations. Sometimes it's not academic enough. You don't have enough references and scholarly prose in there to get your point across for the scholars that are reading it at other places around the globe. Another reason is often they're just not interested in your topic. You've submitted to the wrong division or the wrong SIG, or that SIG has moved on to other topics. So not a lack of interest, or they might be interested, but you're not telling them why they should be interested. The so what question is the big one. I think of all this, the so what. Why should we be concerned with this topic? Why is this important? And why is this study or the follow-up studies that we're going to do going to be important? Another one has to do with length. And Najwa and Verily will talk more about length, I think. But you should abide by the rules that they have put in place. Whatever their requirements are, you should try to abide by them where you can. You can get sneaky in putting in references, more and more references, that's okay. Graphs and charts and tables, and maybe even appendices at the end. Najwa will talk a bit about that. But you can have extra stuff. She's going to say, no, you can't. But you can have so many words, but your references don't count for the words, and your graphs and your tables don't count for the words. So you can have a little extra stuff in those graphs and tables, just as an aside. Sometimes you might cite the wrong references, or at least the references that your reviewers want to see, like themselves. A lot of reviewers like to see them being, or their colleagues, or whatever. So that can be a problem. And keep in mind, if you're submitting a proposal, do not cite yourself. I've made that mistake once or twice. People pick up on it. I thought, here's a harmless little reference of mine, but you're supposed to put authors, not the name, not your names in there. So that's kind of something to avoid anyhow. So not enough data is probably one of the bigger ones. Lack of cohesion is probably one of the top reasons why things are rejected. How are things accepted? Well, here are some things in my handout. Mimi, did they get this handout yet?
Yeah, they did.
Okay. So as you look at this handout, you'll see I've already covered many of the things at the top. If you follow their directions, your chances of approval go up. I mean, typically only 30 to 40% of proposals are accepted. And so it's not like AECT, which we often go to in the ed tech field, or some of the smaller conferences where the proposal acceptance is 60% or 70%, or the SITE conference. I think Tran is in the audience there, right? She just finished her PhD and is heading to Fresno. She presented at conferences like SITE and eLearn and things like that, I think. And those are easier to get accepted than AERA proposals are. That's why often you need to form a team. If you have a team, you might have an expert who's good at the methodology. You might have someone who's really good at literature review, which used to be what I did. I was the literature review person. Now I'm really the conclusions and implications and limitations person. I'm good at that. So find what your strengths are and work with other team members who might have an offset your weaknesses a little bit, or someone who might have more time on the front end. These proposals are going to be due in 2 weeks. So Naja told me yesterday when we talked, she's going to take a lead on a proposal that we're working on, and I'll work on it when she's done with it. So, you know, apportion your time, apportion your responsibilities, maybe even create some kind of timeline for who's going to work on things and when. But teams can also be a team with a professor. It doesn't have to be all graduate students. It can be either way. You can team up with folks. You might even team with someone you've never met before. That's not typical, but it can happen, where you might actually team with someone at another university that you met and form a symposium team and say, we're working on similar proposals. Maybe we can get a couple more and form a symposium group. If we got 4 proposals, maybe we get Houston and Indiana and Minnesota and Fresno or whatever, then you need a discussant and you need a chair. I think it's really important, if you do a symposium, to think about who that discussant's going to be. That is a key thing that the reviewers will look at. In terms of who's on the proposal, it maybe does matter, but you submit these without names. But when people read the program, they'll see who's in your symposium. But in terms of getting it accepted or not, the big names don't matter. What matters for symposium is having data. I've had several symposiums submitted. And by the way, I've had more, Naja will counter this a bit, I've had more rejected symposiums than rejected papers and roundtables. You'll tend to find it's easier for a SIG to accept a paper because they have so many slots for paper. They only have so many for symposia. So you have to be really careful on where you're going to submit something. If you're going to a small SIG, they only have maybe 2 or 3 or 4 total sessions during the whole conference. They don't want to devote themselves just to your SIG proposal. You might have to go to a division for a symposium, or you might contact the chair or president of that SIG and say, I'm thinking about a symposium. How many symposia does your division sponsor per year? And then you find out if you fit or not. So it's worth writing to someone. Your chances of getting accepted do increase if you write to the president or the chair of that SIG just because you got more information. They won't necessarily decide if it's yes or no, but they might say, oh, I've talked to Dr. Lee at Houston and her students, and it's a borderline. I think, well, you know, it's right on, but I know this one, so I'm going to put it in the positive stack, you know, just because. So familiarity does help a bit in all this. Some other points you'll see on that sheet is frame your proposal from a theoretical perspective. Think about grounding your work in one or more people or research areas so that the reader feels good that you're not just a lone ranger out there exploring something no one else has explored. And as part of that, you should think about capturing the reader's attention as to what's the gaps in that area. What are the openings? And this study fits that 1 or 2 of the open areas or gaps. And then at the very end of the proposal, remind the reader that it did that. So you start with that and you end with that. Along the way, you point to your methods and your limitations and things like that. But you want to capture the reader with something enticing. Something, it can be your title, but you don't want to be too cute in your titles. Titles are important. I brought like my first AERA proposal. It's called Readers, Who's the Most Effective Reader? And it was a method that we developed in cooperative learning called Readers. And it was just a, you know, kind of a cute little, but it's not that cute. You know, it's just something that you know, and that's back in I hate to say it, that was 1991. It was not actually my first AERA accepted paper. It was the first one I could find. The older one, the first one is 1988. I was 8 years old when that was accepted. So, you know, another one we've got that was rejected, I thought was one of the best ones we ever submitted. One of my colleagues from West Virginia, Kevin Curry, and I, and Tom Reynolds, who I went to grad school, was on keystroke mapping and writing. We watched kids writing unfold over time. We thought it was, you know, a really cool way to like computer log data. And we just, for whatever reason, didn't submit to the right division or whatever. So the last thing on the whole sheet you see in there is forgive and forget. The last thing on your handout, sometimes you just don't know why it was rejected. Well, as part of that, you should try and resubmit if you don't know why, but go to another SIG or a division. Don't give up. Sometimes you have to try 2 or 3 times. Dr. Lee and I had a proposal this year. I don't know if you told him about that, but it was the 3rd try was the charm that it was accepted. So sometimes you have to have a little grit. There's a new book by Angela Duckworth called Grit from UPenn. And AERA is all about that grittiness, but being smart about where you're submitting, contact people, get to know the audience a bit, and capture their attention. But don't overwhelm the reader with too much jargon. Don't overwhelm the reader with too long of a title. 15 words or less is usually enough, and probably all AERA will accept is 15-word titles or less. Be creative with your limitations. Be creative with your future studies, but admit to your limitations. Don't hide your limitations, especially when you write up your final paper. Get people's feedback on it. Give a draft to someone and get their feedback on what they think about a topic and so forth. What else in here is important? Don't expect to go to AERA every year. There'll be some years you want to take off. So it's an important conference in our field. About 15,000 people go. My first AERA, I was a 2nd-year graduate student, or actually my first full year, end of my first full year, was in Washington, D.C. in 1987. I drove my car with 2 people. My colleague, Dr. Tom Reynolds, and I and someone else drove to Washington, D.C. from Madison and stayed at my sister's and saved money. My next year, 1988, I presented my master's thesis at AERA on critical and creative thinking with technology. And I got to meet a lot of people. One thing about AERA when you go, make it a graduate course you never had. Find all the leading scholars in an area of interest that you might have. Maybe you have a qualifying exam, you're gonna write a paper on a certain topic. And you can find all these people and research them and then meet them and get their most current papers and read through them, and you get to become part of that apprenticeship process, part of that community of practice. So you might not go every year, but when you go, especially as a 1st year, 2nd year, 3rd or 4th year, or even a postdoc, you should be thinking about making it a graduate course of some kind and highlight the program. This is my first top session at this time. This is my 2nd session. This is my 3rd session. When I was a 2nd year and 3rd year grad student, I had every session mapped out and what I was going to do the whole time at AERA. And then also network, invite people to lunch that you maybe want to read their paper, you've read their papers, or maybe you don't invite them to lunch your 1st year, but maybe you come back the 2nd year. You get to know them a little better and you want to meet them and so forth. So those are some things you'll see on that list. I'm running out here, but be strategic in how you treat the conference and in how you submit your proposals. Do resubmit, do get feedback. Oh, post your paper. If you get an accepted paper, try and make a simple link. Maybe you have a place you can put it in Dropbox. Those are very long links. You can use tiny URL to create a small, simple URL so people don't have to type that whole thing in. Or get a website. I've bought many websites. I have publicationshare.com. I said, just go to Publication Share, you can get my AERA paper. Make it simple for people to get your work, become a scholar, become part of this community of practice, if you will, as your years in the field go on. Be careful bouncing from conference to conference. I recommend if you get an accepted paper, write the paper before the conference and submit it to a journal. I've had several times where I've had an accepted paper before presenting at AERA. In the old days, my best papers were never submitted. I've got the reader's paper we never published. I had a paper on cooperative reading methods across the country that was 1 edit away in Review of Ed Research. I didn't do the edit. I regret many things as a grad student that I didn't do that last push and get things out. So be careful getting excited about this next conference, this next event. Try to polish your work and get a couple things out as opposed to getting 6 or 7 small things started and never finished. So I think that's probably one of the last things I want to say before opening up the questions here from all of you. There'll probably be a couple other things that I'm going to look at as you're asking questions that I'll bring up. But let's see if the audience has any questions at this point, Mimi. And
okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So I think here, can you state your name first? Right? Yeah.
Greg Jonason. And I was wondering about I can ask about dissertation as well. I mean, because those could turn into papers, right?
Yes, sure, Dick. Sure.
Right. So would that be a good idea, is to leverage your dissertation and use that as a platform to start generating paper ideas and subject matter for future conferences?
You should divide up that dissertation into at least 3 papers, preferably even more, or at least 2, but preferably even more. And that's the start of your foundation as a scholar. One might be just a theory paper that you submit. One might be a piece of the methods that might be more quantitative in nature. Another one might be more qualitative in nature. So the answer is yes, and you should also create a timeline of when you're going to do it and map out the possible journals that piece could go to.
So can I just add in?
Yeah.
So I'm in the process of like doing data analysis and writing up the results. So I'm actually going to send at least one of my chapters as a proposal. I feel like it is really a good opportunity to get feedback in addition to your advisor's feedback. So sometimes you do not send the whole draft out for review by your committee, right? But this piece, which is short and concise, it's really good for you to lay out your thoughts, gain confidence in sending it out if it gets accepted, to present it, and also to get feedback. I think it's a very valuable avenue for you to do that. So I don't know which stage of the dissertation you are now, but it's definitely a good place to submit. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. More questions?
Any questions? Another one from Greg. Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so say you get a book deal from an academic publisher or a trade publication publisher. What's the best way to go about executing that once you've signed like the W-2 form with them?
A book project, turning your dissertation into a book, or any project into a book?
Dissertation, I guess, or let's just go with that.
Well, if you're thinking about turning your dissertation project into a book, think about writing it up like a book. Think about writing it like chapters so it's easier to do. My colleague Tom Reynolds and I planned to take our dissertations and make a book out of them, and we never did. You may see our MOOCs book that maybe Dr. Lee has shown you now some years later, but we never did. We should have. And so I messed up many times as a final year grad student and first 3 years out as a professor. I messed up over and over and over. We're trying to provide you some tips. I would say be careful about writing a book right away as the form of scholarship in the field of education. Journal articles hold more coin in the realm than books do. That being said, if you've got something that's well polished and you've really committed to doing it, you shouldn't do it just because of the advice you get. If you really want to do something and you're passionate about it, then you should. You should write, the publishers want 1 chapter from your dissertation as a potential chapter for your book, 1 or 2 chapters you give to them. They get it reviewed. You negotiate a little bit. I've had about 10 different book projects, and each one is different. Publishers have a script that they want you to fill out. They have your purpose of your book, the audience of your book, your expectations. They want you to tell them who the audience is. They want you to tell them what your goals are. You have to be very explicit for many. So what I've been doing is writing the book first and then seeing a publisher. And I avoid a lot of their paperwork. But as a new person, you're going to have to go through their paperwork. You're going to have to recommend reviewers. I mean, the whole 9 yards. You can take your dissertation into a book. Very few of mine have done so. Noriko Hara did it with hers here at Indiana. Dr. Lee knows her. It took her about 10 years, and she went with Springer not quite 10 years after dissertating. Maybe it was on communities of practice. Just because you're in the throes of so many things after graduating, writing a book goes on the back burner. And so I've only seen a few, but I've seen brilliant dissertations that look like books. So I wouldn't say not to do it, but I would say get the journal articles out first.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Sona?
Anyone else?
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
My question is, not now, I will introduce it first. The divisions and the SIGs are very diverse.
Yeah.
And did it happen to you that you have a presentation that fits under a SIG and a division? However, you struggled in a way to link it to the theme, and how did you go about it?
Yeah, again, I would recommend talking to the SIG chair, maybe having them send you some sample proposals from last year that were accepted if they're willing to do so. I would talk to either the chair or vice, there are different officers within that SIG, and tell them what you're attempting to do. You could look at last year's program. I think Dr. Lee has some examples of the 2016 program. You can look up the division, and by the way, a lot of the divisions today have their own websites. You can go to the division website and get the titles of the papers from this past year or the proposals from this past year, and then that will be a way for you to frame your own study. And then you can even write to the author. I've written to the authors of people whose papers were accepted last year and said, here's what I'm working on, can you give me some tips? So you can do all that. Those are all ways in which you can try and frame it so that division will be more willing to accept it. Maybe we should do one or two more questions before going to Naja and the team.
Okay. Erwin in the back. It's Erwin. Yes.
Hi, Dr. Bob.
Hi, how are you? I've met you before.
Yeah,
Erwin, yes.
So my question is, most of the students here might not have the data ready. They might have the theory, they might have the framework, they might have even the research design, but they might not have the data or even IRB approval yet. In your experience or the other students' experience, do you have any tips for us so that we can go through this proposal process?
Yeah, if you don't have data and you're 2 weeks away from the conference, and my team right now is in the midst of collecting some data, so I know that experience. It's very common. You then create a timeline. You then look at the logistics, and you maybe see what's the piece of data you can collect now. If you can't collect enough data in time for the proposal, then you start thinking about, well, maybe it's not an AERA proposal. Maybe it's a proposal for a different type of conference that's more willing to accept it. So you want to have the goal be a prestigious, like American Psych Association, AERA, or a comparative education conference, or whatever it might happen to be. Naja goes to the comparative ed conferences. Whatever your prestigious one in the field, you want that the goal, but that's not always where we end up going. So if you don't have the data, it becomes that, not having the data becomes the impetus to go and collect data. It forces you to either make a decision at that, either fish or cut bait, I think is the American expression, or something like that, So right now you can still work on a proposal here in June 27th and get it in time for July 22nd. There's enough time. But you have to think about what kind of data are you collecting. If it's qualitative interview kind of data, it's going to take you a while to collect and analyze and so forth. If it's quantitative, it might be a little more simpler to do. So think about what your data set is. I found a couple things in my handout I forgot to mention. One is polish your proposal. Reread. It's amazing how many little errors you'll find 5 times. If you put it away, go to sleep, wake up the next day, and then edit it. Another thing is you can jump on the bandwagon. Unfortunately or fortunately, current topics do matter sometimes. I actually don't like that's that case, but oftentimes you'll see more current topics accepted than those things from 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. And then if you're accepted, practice your speech in front of your teammates, If you've got I always have my graduate student team, Justin remembers doing this with me for Vancouver, maybe even during Vancouver 4 years ago or 5 years ago, and during Austin site conference as well, we practice. We have a timer. You put your iPhone on a timer, 10 minutes or however, and when that iPhone goes off, you're done. So that's just, you pan the audience. You want to sound confident. You don't want to look back at your notes too much. You maybe want to have your slides in front of you. You even have a computer in front of you so you look smart, even though you're not maybe all that. No, I'm sure you're smart. You look smart. By having the monitor in front of you, and you might have a remote clicker, so they don't even see you moving ahead. It looks like you're speaking in a conversation with them. You create a conversation. You don't try to read too much. Once in a while, it's okay to turn back and read a quote and turn back and point to things. That's okay. But you don't want to spend your whole time with your head this way and not address the audience and get right there in front of them so they see you. So you want to make that it be a natural kind of confident. You want to exude, but not arrogance either. You want to exude so that you've practiced a bit, you know it, but you're willing to accept criticism, you're willing to accept questions that people might have, but yet this is where your research is at today. This is what you've done. You feel comfortable with that. You might point out limitations and where you're going next. If you're honest about limitations, the questions that come at you from the discussant are going to be less, they're going to hit you less if you've already admitted to those as limitations. So those are just some presentation tips. There are many, many more. I want to write a book called Gotcha at some point on professional speaking and being human. But Mimi, you want to?
Yeah, so this is a question for Nadia, Justin, and Verily. Maybe you can answer this in your during your presentation. So, obviously, ideally, if you have with now such an emphasis on having the findings and at least preliminary findings at the proposal stage for AERA. And ideally, if you have the findings, significant issues to report, that'll be great. But, many of us who are starting for the first time don't have an IRB, don't have the findings yet. In those situations, and I want to address it to three of you and listen to Kurt, your answer at the end later on after, the presentations, do you think it's better to submit as without any findings with the idea that it's not going to get accepted, but at least get feedback on the design or theoretical framework of it, or try to turn it around as more of like a critical literature review or meta-analysis, so at least you can present it as if there's, kind of some preliminary findings. So, when it's not an ideal situation, I want, us to have what would be the second best option. And so I just wanted to hear about what you guys think about what if you want to participate, but if you don't have the findings yet.
Let's do the order of Nadia, Verily, and Justin, just like we'll do it later on.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was Dr. Monk and I, as well as another couple people, are working on a research project now, and that's sort of an issue we've run into. So within the AERA submission portal, you're actually asked, do you have IRB approval for this study, for this paper? And you have to answer that question. It does not let you proceed until you do. And you, I think, have the options of saying yes, no, not applicable, or pending. If you don't say yes, you have to write like a long justification as to why. So there are a couple of ways you can go about doing this, and I've done this in the past where I just absolutely did not have IRB approval. It wasn't going to happen. I couldn't turn in data. So I took what was a literature review and what I knew my methods were going to be and turned it into a completely theoretical paper. And so I turned it into, here's what would be the correct methods and a methodological theoretical paper. And I kind of spun it that way, and I explained, well, this is not IRB is not necessary because I'm not actually collecting data. And that's a way you can kind of deal with that system. But in terms of actually collecting data, if you're planning to do the research study between when you've submitted the proposal, the July 22nd, and when AERA actually occurs, that's kind of tricky. It's up to, I guess, a personal discretion. If you would like critical feedback, maybe Dr. Ron can comment on when feedback gets turned around to you. You get 3 reviewers, and some of the reviewers will write you paragraphs, and some of them will write you 2 lines, and so you're not always guaranteed amazing feedback. So it's a toss-up. If you want the feedback, you great. But more than likely, if you don't have any findings, you're probably going to be rejected, especially if you start writing in the future tense. I will be collecting data on this, and I expect to find that. Yeah, that's an absolute no-no. You always want to write in the past tense, and you want to say, we did this, or our data collection resulted in blah, blah, blah. So those are just some of the tips that I've learned over the years.
Great, thank you, yes.
Verily?
So I was fortunate to be working with someone who actually had existing data. So there was a huge corpus of video data that was available. So I don't know, like the professors that you work with, whether they have existing data. So I was interested in design. So I actually did a preliminary analysis of the data. And so I sent in the proposal. It was accepted. And then for the actual paper, I chose a focal group out from the huge data corpus, and that was my actual paper that I presented at the conference. So I guess I know theoretical frameworks as well as the data, it may not match. So I mean, you will have to try to find a match, but you might want to ask your professors whether they have existing data that you could use. And you probably will have to continue with that same set of data for the actual paper. But if you are like looking for, like between now and July 22nd, you probably, I think it might be more realistic to work on existing data than try to collect data and analyze at the same time. Because sometimes that results in a loss of quality, which it really depends on what you want to achieve through the process. So, I mean, if, for example, you know that you have no analysis, no findings, you could try what Naja suggested, but personally, I've not done that.
Okay.
Justin?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is just, you know, sometimes it's not the end of the world to just say, you know what, it's just AERA this time because of the deadline, it's not the right fit. If you're really set on AERA, hey, make sure that it's ready for next year. Or, you know, there's other conferences that are going to be, you know, have proposals due in a few more months. So, yeah, I mean, I would hesitate to say, oh, I want to feed this or I want to submit this just to get feedback, even though I know it's going to be rejected. That doesn't, I don't think that's necessarily the best way. There's other ways to get good feedback from people without going through the AERA submission process. So, you know, you got to make sure you're not just thinking, oh, I have to have this done right now. You know, it's not the end of the world if it takes you a few more months or you submit it to a different conference. So that's all that I would add to that.
I'll add one thing to it, and it's like you don't want to have blinders.
Oh.
Okay? So you want to have some purpose. You don't want to just submit just for the sake of having a submission in, you know. So you don't want to go in blind. You want to feel a little confident about what you have. And yeah, IRB is important to have. I mean, just for your own sake of ethics and so forth. So should we go to Mimi, should we have Naja, Verily, and Justin give us 5 minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So Naja, you wanna give us a start on your handout, and Mimi, you want to hold up the second handout for them?
Yes, all of us have the second one. It's writing on ARA proposal. This one, the 2-pager. Yes.
And they're going to post it to Blackboard too?
No, we are going to post them after the workshop. So yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, Naja.
So before I kind of start off, I see some of you have already found me on some social media and academia. So if you want to, yeah, I was getting like pings while we were talking. So if you want to like friend me or message me if anything I've said sort of resonates or we have aligned interests, please feel free.
Thank you.
For AERA, for a lot of big conferences, there's this notion around paper prestige. I want to present a paper, and because I presented a paper, I am excellent, right? I kind of hate presenting papers. It's not that I'm per se bad at it. It's just I feel like I don't get to interact with people and I don't get the feedback I want. And I love getting feedback about my projects because I think it makes me a better writer, a better scholar, a better researcher. And so for that reason, I push proposals as a paper, but I kind of secretly hope and pray that they get accepted as a poster or a roundtable. Because in that way, I make more connections. I'm able to kind of exchange business cards and make more friends that way. And so I actually love doing posters unless it's something like a paper that I'm trying to get published, then I would want to present that paper. And so while I know a lot of people kind of push for presenting a paper proposal, I highly encourage you all to check that paper box, but also put in the opportunities to present it as a roundtable or a poster. So don't feel like you have to eliminate those options. I think the most rigorous standards are for a paper in terms of writing the proposal, and then it kind of goes down from there. So if paper is your goal, select that first, and then pick the two that go underneath. So I just wanted to kind of like throw that out there. Mm-hmm. I think there was a question in the audience, I don't remember who asked it, about divisions and SIGs. Mm-hmm. And then I know Dr. Bonk covered it a couple times. That's been my personal struggle. Where do I submit what I wrote? Like, I have no idea. I kind of look ahead of time and figure out what are some of the trending topics, what are some of these groups interested in, and I figure out a division. Now, each division has different sections. So it's not like if you're interested in teacher and teacher education, or if you're interested in like urban education, you kind of have to figure out where you fit. And then within that, there's a little bit more specific departments and interest groups. What my approach in the past has been just write my proposal, and then I kind of narrowed down 3 or 4 SIGs or sections that I could possibly submit it to, narrow those down to maybe 2 or 3, and pick 2, and then I tweak my proposal a little bit to align. And so I always want to have my voice and my research represented best, and not really have it skewed so much by representing the theme, because the theme is always going to be about education. I know I can switch a couple words around and make it more generalized and make it kind of fit whatever the broader scale is. And so I don't want to feel like I am stifled, forced, or have a writer's block because I can't like mix my theoretical framework and my lit review and my data to admit whatever ubiquitous learning complex thing that they're talking about, and that's the theme for this year. So that's kind of been my approach for the past couple of AERAs. The other thing that I learned with AERA compared to some of the other smaller conferences, please don't wait until the last night or 2 nights before. AERA is not a one-nighter. You can't, I know some of you probably may have tried to do this with some conferences. It's not an all-nighter presentation or proposal that you can write. It's like a 2,000-word thing that you have got to put together that's got to be rigorous, has to be spell checked, has to have APA citing in there. I mean, it's got to have the works. So please don't wait until the last minute, because not only does it take away from your scholarly body of work, it just leads to more errors that you could have easily have fixed had you not waited until the last minute. So those are kind of my little tidbits.
Very helpful. Thank you. Yes.
Verily's next. So Verily, you want to add to that or go off on some things that are on the handout that weren't mentioned?
Okay. Right. I think Naja, she included a screen capture of like what you see in the system when you're uploading a paper. So over there, they have 6 sections that you definitely must have. So they have objectives, purposes, perspective, theoretical framework, methods, data sources, analysis, results, and then lastly, the scientific and scholarly significance. So these are the sections that you must have in your proposal. I think they are the most basic. And then what Naju talked about the divisions and sections. I just went, I think in the handout we did put a link to the division descriptions, but I realized that they don't have the sections there. Naja and Justin, did you see it? So the sections actually, when you are submitting the paper, you can actually see the sections within the submission system. So for example, if you are confused about the sections, you might just go into the system and like start the initial phases so that you are prepared for the submission, and then that is where you can actually go in and look at the sections, and the descriptions are actually within the system. So that's about the sections within the divisions.
Okay.
So with regards to getting proposals accepted, I guess, okay, I told Dr. Bong that I would share my personal experience more than anything. So over 3 years, I submitted 7 proposals. 4 were accepted, 3 were rejected. But I have a good story, which is one that was rejected in one of the years was accepted the following year. So, and I think got the best poster award. So that's an encouragement for you. If you actually have papers that were rejected, you should submit again. I mean, especially if you iterate based on the feedback. So I've already told you about one of my papers where I submitted preliminary findings. So my final paper was actually very different from the original paper, but that was good. I think they were fine with my preliminary analysis. So you can always do a more in-depth analysis later on. Okay. So for another paper that I worked on, which is on circuitry learning with electronic kits, that was a quantitative paper. So Naja will not be approving of this, but we had a lot of figures, tables, and graphs that were. So we cheated on the word limit by putting in tables that became graphics, you know. But it worked. It was accepted. So yeah. So that was how we worked on that paper. And then so why were some of my papers rejected? So one of the reasons was, so I'm kind of working in between 2 disciplines like IST and design. So I was referring to a lot of literature from the design field. And so one of the reviews, like he wrote an extremely long paragraph on that. I didn't include this paper. And so I guess this is the case, especially if you're working on proposals that are across different fields. Like let's say you're including literature that is not typically within your field. You have to be especially diligent to make sure that you are comprehensive in your references. The other paper that was rejected was a paper that used video analysis. So there were questions about, so they want you to be very clear about, let's say, for example, you did video analysis. Why did you choose these cases? Why did you choose these segments? And I think for our case, the different case studies that we chose, some of it was hard. I mean, on looking back, we realized that it was hard for the reader to connect to the context or to how we operationalize our concepts. So we were talking about circuitry and these concepts, and then how we graded the pre and post test. So it was difficult for them to understand that. So these are some of the things to take note of, especially if you're doing a qualitative analysis or specifically video analysis. So, so one of the things that I wanted to say, in addition to what I just said, was that really use the AERA as a way to develop your growth as a scholar, because it's not, well, I mean, it's cool when you submit a paper and it's accepted and you get to go and all of that, but it's really, it really is a way for you to what do you call that? To improve your art as a scholar in different ways. So, so I should tell you that the paper, one of the papers, so don't take the reviews too seriously, because like what Naja said, sometimes they give you a paragraph, sometimes they give you 2 lines. So that paper that was one of my papers that was rejected, there were 4 reviewers, 3 were favorable, 1 was not, and it was rejected. So that's sad. And then, so sometimes it's also a matter of chance, because the one year the paper which used preliminary data analysis, it was submitted to a SIG, and that particular year there were very few proposals that were submitted for that SIG. So the acceptance rate for that particular SIG was higher. So really sometimes it's a matter of chance. So don't use it as a measure of whether like you were a good scholar or not. I think you have to take it with a pinch of salt. I think the reviews that are most important come from your advisor, comes from your other scholars around you, your other people around you. It's like an apprenticeship, a community. So I think people who really care about you, I think you should take their feedback seriously. One other thing is, so we had 2 papers that had to deal with, like, for example, one topic, like learning of circuitry. So we submitted them to one division, which is learning and instruction, but we submitted them to different sections. So like if you have 2 papers that are kind of like on the same theme, maybe slightly different data, but it's like you are submitting them to one division. So the general advice is that don't submit it to the same section. Okay, the last thing I want to say is, so Dr. Bonk talks about like, after you put up the paper, you release it and let people download it. Actually, my advice is the opposite. So normally I don't release my paper in the online repository. So normally when you do your you submit your paper, at one of the last stages, it says that do you want your paper to be available in the online repository? So which means that are you giving access of your full paper to anyone who attends AERA? So for me at this stage in my study, my aim is publication. So it's like sometimes when you release it out, I guess I'm not scared that people steal ideas from me, but what a professor told me was that it actually did happen, that somebody took the ideas and developed it into another publication. So it really depends. But if you want to build up your resume, I guess it's possible for you to say that the paper was presented. You can create a link to it, but again, it's back to what you really want to achieve out from the conference.
That's a good point, Verily. I didn't intend for that to be I don't use the repository either. What I was saying is when I'm comfortable with a paper, I put it up on my own site. But yeah, you can put a copyright C on there. And I once had a student from another country as a visiting scholar who tried publishing not only my work, but a professor named Dr. Schwen, who Dr. Lee knows fairly well. He tried publishing our work, and he was just a visiting scholar. So you have to be cautious about this, you know. I will also point out, I met Verily when she was giving a paper in Penang, Malaysia 6 years ago, and she got the award-winning paper as a graduate student in Singapore. So she's done great work for a long time. We should go to Justin and get Justin's 5-minute summary of what we haven't mentioned so far.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I agree. I think that all of this, all of these suggestions and tips are extremely useful. What I wanted to talk about for just a couple minutes here is I wanted to give, I imagine several of you or maybe many of you have already been to an AERA, but maybe not, or a different conference. But I wanted to give just kind of some of my experiences and what I've learned from actually being at the conference. So kind of after once you're there at the conference, what I've learned. And the first thing is just take advantage of, not only meeting new people, but this is a chance to interact and to be with your advisor or your coworkers in a totally different context. You're together for hours at a time and, things like that. So it's a really great way to just, it's almost like you talk to them as different people and you realize, oh, wait, Dr. Bonk is a regular person, not just the teacher too. And so it's conferences in general are a great way to just take advantage of that. Go out to dinner with them, and that's a great way. I have certainly tried to just, hey, can I tag along? And that way you get to meet. That's where I'm sure I met Dr. Lee and others. Is just, hey, can I tag along to dinner? And you get to meet their network, which in turn builds my network. And or even sharing taxis and things like that. So it's a great way to just interact with faculty members in a different way. Dr. Bonk kind of already mentioned this, but certainly, try to meet some of the authors and presenters that you're particularly interested in. Absolutely, if you're able to kind of go through the whole conference program and really try to find all of the people that you want to meet, that can be pretty overwhelming too. So if you have to just, start with, hey, I really want to meet these 2 or 3 people during this conference. And, find out when they're presenting and go to those presentations first and stick around after the conference after their presentation. So you can say, hey, I'm so-and-so. I'm one of Dr. Bonk's students. I'm one of Dr. Lee's students. I really enjoyed this. And I wanted to at least come up and say hi to you. And that's just a neat way to, again, that's where you can actually meet them in person. And then like Dr. Bonk said, maybe not the first year, you don't go out for coffee or go out and meet him for drinks or whatever, but maybe the second year you say, hey, you probably don't remember, but I met you last year at so-and-so and you gave this presentation and I remember liking this, or, it's a great way to actually get that face-to-face interaction. One of the big advantages, and as we mentioned, Dr. Bonk said, AERA is like 15,000 people, it's a huge conference. So I would absolutely try to go to some topics, go to some presentations that are just totally different than what you're doing at all. Just look for a few things that just look interesting and are not connected to your work at all. Because oftentimes you'll find things that they're doing that might tweak your work. Famously, Steve Jobs talked about, he learned a lot from going to, not calligraphy, but, classes on text and how they're writing, even though he was interested in computers, but that influenced how the Apple computer was designed. So, take advantage of that. This is a big conference with a lot of topics that are sometimes way out there and just interesting. And, just go attend to some of them. You don't have to go to a lot, but do that. Having said that, don't try it. You can't do it all, so don't feel like, oh, I have to do everything. Make sure you take some time to say, hey, maybe this block of hours, I'm just going to sit in this one area of the hotel and attend the conferences or the sessions that are right here. Sometimes I know, like in Vancouver, the conference was spread out between, 5-6 different hotels. And so you're not able to travel back and forth between hotels. So sometimes it's nice to just find an area and kind of, get in that one area. Nadia mentioned this, but I would absolutely agree that round tables and poster sessions, in many ways, I think are more useful than paper presentations. There's more of a chance to interact with people, not only for yourself presenting, but also go and attend those poster sessions, go and attend round table sessions where you can ask more questions, and things like that. And then one thought that I had as Dr. Bonk was talking about practicing and being ready for actual presenting. One of the best presenter tips that I learned that I saw was at AERA in Philadelphia. And it was Dr. Aaron Daring from University of Minnesota, who does work in adventure learning. And they were presenting on some cool and innovative projects and talking about some of the websites and things like that they had done. Don't try to do a live demo of a website. If you're trying to show off a website, what he had done is he had done a screen capture of how their web system worked. And it was beautiful, it worked great. So he's able to just hit play, and then the demo is playing while he's just talking, because Wi-Fi is never good, things like that. So if you're trying to do a web demo, record it ahead of time and have a video embedded into your presentation. Because to make it even more of a point, the person right before him was trying to do a live demo and was trying to go to their website, and of course it's not working, and that just is frustrating for everybody. And then finally, make sure that you take advantage of, being in whatever city you're going to. These are in amazing locations, and so make sure you find at least a couple fun things to do while you're there. But yeah, AERA by itself is an interesting and different conference than other smaller conferences that have other benefits as well. But so that's important to make sure that you take advantage of the good things with AERA too. So those are some of the things that I would add.
Yeah, I'll add one thing to what Justin said. Test out your computer if you're going to use it, whatever systems you're going to use. A few weeks ago, I was at the UT Tyler, and Aaron Daring was the presenter the next day. And he gave a whole session on mobile apps for the PC, and no one had PCs. Everyone came with Macintoshes. So you have to know what people have. You have to test your technology, So I think we've made a lot of good points. There's 15,000 people that go to AERA, and you'll see the same 15 to 20 friends of yours on the streets. You'll still see all your friends, believe it or not, with 15,000, people. So Mimi, do we want to open up for some final questions and comments?
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to open the floor to some questions. Yes?
I have a question for Nadia. So for your theoretical paper, did you submit it to AERA, and how did the outcome? Was it accepted?
Sorry, could you repeat that question? I had a little trouble.
Yeah, because you said a while ago, you did a theoretical paper. Because so what happened to your submission? Did you submit it to AERA? Was it accepted, or what?
It was. Yeah. So it was actually a chapter 4. It was a methods chapter of theory of a dissertation. It was completely a hypothetical dissertation chapter on digital epistemologies, and it was, a literature review heavy that it worked. I got a lot of critical feedback from the reviewers. I think if maybe they had ranked me slightly lower, it probably wouldn't have been accepted. Yeah.
To add to that,
a poster. I had ranked it paper, round table, and then a poster, and they shot it all the way to poster, and I was thrilled with that.
Nadia,
and I got such great feedback that I was like, I'm happy.
Nadia, which division and section was that? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I really don't, because it was about how do graduate students do qualitative research using collaborative tools.
Mm.
And I used the same data set to actually present at 2 different conferences. And so I took one data set that focused on kind of the process of collecting the data, and then I focused one on the actual theory of it.
Nadia, I think I'm going to ask you at some point if you might be willing to share those 2 different proposals, or if we can kind of see an example of how you divided them up, because a lot of our students are interested in what it means to, have 2 proposals or 2 publications out of a single data set. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have some more recent work that Dr. Bonk and another research team that I have done, and I believe one research project that spanned a year.
A rogue research team.
6 or 7 different conferences.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we have done everything from taking the qualitative data, quantitative data, it's a mixed method study, all the way to how did we retain teacher voice in qualitative data, to the actual qualitative data. And so we had such a kind of plethora of data that we could pull from and spin it, that we've actually taken it in so many different directions. I think I got sick of presenting it at this point, and I'm just like, I'm not presenting on this anymore.
Yeah, that was on teacher, as far you have CNI people in the room, that was on teacher practices with global technology, pedagogical, and professional development of teachers for global education. Right, Naja?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you guys were very comprehensive, and I really appreciate. We really appreciate, you guys all coming in for a full hour and a half. So I want to give you guys a round of applause. Thank you. Yes, we're excited. Yes.
Thank you, everyone. And since we're all IU people, you will get your IU pins in the mail.
Thanks for having us.
So Nadja and Verily and Justin, are you all coming to San Antonio? We're planning to.
We are submitting, but it depends, right?
Oh, yes. If you come to San Antonio, it's gonna be my treat on Tex-Mex.
Ooh, okay. That's motivation.
Yes, yes. We have really good food. So okay, well, thank you very much. And yeah, it was wonderful to see you, everyone, and it was just very valuable time.
I'm glad Connect worked here today. So this has been recorded, and those that weren't here, I'll try and get the link for all of them. And even those that were here, if they want to rewatch this.
Yes, it was great. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you for inviting us, and we'll bye, and I'll disconnect here. Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
All the best.
Okay.
Bye.